Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sentinel. This is part three of our Kabul withdrawal series with Colonel CJ Douglas. In part two, we discussed the composition of the ANA and how we sort of tried to build this force in our own image, and it didn't quite work out the way it should have. And we also talked about some of the command and control issues, specifically how in the middle of this withdrawal operation, uh, General Miller, the four-star, was retired, and Lieutenant General Carl Mundy was also retired, and another Marcent was assigned, essentially at the same time when all this was being planned to conduct the NEO operations. And then we also discussed how the command and control was structured in terms of once General Miller left Afghanistan, they assigned U.S. forces Afghanistan with a two-star admiral. Their primary focus was, looking at strike packages against high-value targets. And then we also had this JTF crisis response with the Marine one-star, and their primary focus was conducting the non-combatant evacuation. And then on top of that, we also had a couple other units that were floating around the Persian Gulf. One was the 24th Mu Expeditionary Unit with BLT 1-8 underneath it, and the other one was a special purpose MAGTAF with 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. And finally, we had the 82nd Airborne Division with their one brigade underneath them under Major General Chris Donahue, a two-star. So what happened was, on paper, this command and control looks really neat. All the lines are straight and all that, but in reality, it didn't work out that way because you had multiple units responsible for the perimeter and processing of the evacuees. Now, the problem with that is there should be one chain of command that every troop knows from that young Marine or soldier all the way up to the President of the United States. If we make it too complicated, that, for example, if BLT 21 is a special purpose MAGTAF, is also working for the JTF commander and also for the U.S. Forces Afghanistan commander, it starts getting complicated. The chain of command is not clear, and it affects unit cohesion. You've got part of the Army guarding, the Army's guarding like 2/3 of the airfield, and then you got Marines, they've got their own battle space falling under a separate chain of command, which has dual chains underneath it, special purpose MAGTAF, the Joint Task Force, and you've got the U.S. Forces Afghanistan. So, it gets very convoluted and confusing. So what happens if the chain of command gets convoluted? The left arm doesn't know what the right arm is doing. Create these seams and gaps within not only the command structure, but also on what's happening on the ground. And that's exactly what happened. And the reason I say that is initially they thought there was going to be a vehicle-borne IED, so they shut down the north gate, they shut down the east gates, anything that had vehicle access, and everything got funneled towards Abbey Gate because there was sort of a little bit of standoff. But there's so many people coming in that not everybody was checked. The Taliban was supposed to check everybody at their checkpoints, at the outer checkpoints, but there's people coming in from all sides, through the canals, different ways approaching it. And the suicide bomber got in there, and then we know what happened. So my problem is with all this is as follows. Commanders, if there was a unified command structure, the commander can focus on the most important thing, and that's force protection. Without force protection, you can't accomplish the mission. I mean, it's really that simple. And unfortunately, what happened was, because of the multiple commands, there was nobody really focusing on the overall force protection of the operation. And we've taken these young troops and put them literally face to face with crowds. I mean, they're in most cases, they're mingled in. If you look at the pictures of the canal, they're mingled in with the crowds. And that's a huge force protection risk, right? And the other issue becomes is, what is the priority for the Taliban? Who are they supposed to let in? And we're going to talk about this in part three. So I think that's very important. And then finally, we sort of broached this thing about this investigation that Colonel CJ Douglas was assigned to. And the investigation was very, very narrow in scope. And the scope of that investigation was the incidents that happened at Abbey Gate. That was it. And evidently, there was another investigation going on for that erroneous drone strike. So they had these two investigations going on, and the FBI was doing a terrorism investigation for the suicide bomber. So you've got three of these investigations going on, but there's no overarching investigation that's happening. So the public was perhaps misled, because we're led to believe that investigation happened, it cleared everybody, and it wasn't a complex attack. And come to find out, it was a very narrow-scoped investigation. That investigation only looked at the events and what happened at Abbey Gate. I read the investigation, and I found its conclusions to be very lukewarm, and I'll tell you why. In the investigation, they said the task organization worked. It didn't work for obvious reasons. The main reason, because people took their eye off the ball. Now, granted, they were paying attention to a suicide bomber in a vehicle, right? And they shut down the gates. They were accessible by a vehicle. But what happened was, the crowds moved to Abbey Gate, which was a gate left open for processing. And we already had the Marines at that gate intermingled with the civilian population. And then the risk goes up exponentially, because these civilians haven't been checked. And once you start to intermingle with them, and it's just a matter of time that the enemy figures out, hey, we can attack through this, through this channel, and that's exactly what they did. So so that's one issue. So what I would have done if the threat level was so high that they were expecting through intelligence reports a suicide bomber coming in, then they should have just shut down operations. There's no rush. I mean, just because the president said we have to be out of there by 31 August, we could have asked for extension. We don't know if that happened or not, because their overall investigation wasn't done. We don't know if we considered Bagram while the operations were going on in Kabul, because if you look at the timeline, the Taliban took control of Bagram on 10 August. This Abbey Gate incident happened on 26 August. So there's a 16-day period where the Taliban had control of Bagram. And if the Taliban's already protecting us in Kabul, we could have cut a deal with them to allow us to use Bagram as an evacuation point, because Kabul was overwhelmed. So we could have stopped operations in Kabul and moved them to Bagram. So that was one option. The second option was we could have just done a surface evacuation to Pakistan and let the Pakistani authorities screen people for us, priorities given to American nationals and green card holders and U.S. government employees. Second priority is given to other country nationals and so forth. And then we could have staged these people and taken them out of Pakistan. So this type of thinking wasn't going on. And the reason it wasn't going on was because the task organization was flawed. We just had too many chefs. We had too many different commands going on. And if a young Marine can't figure out what the hell's going on, certainly not suggesting that commanders like Major General Donahue or the other commanders for the CJTF and U.S. Forces Afghanistan weren't good officers and weren't working together well. They were. But the problem is, when you divide responsibility among so many commands, there's nobody really ultimately thinking at the strategic level, operational level, and the tactical level. That's how you got to divide your command and control. But if everybody's just focused and overwhelmed by this massive crowd coming in there, then nobody's paying attention to what's going on and thinking for alternatives. The second conclusion that the investigation made was the Abbey Gate was the main effort. Yes, it was, because they shut down the other gates. Everybody focused on Abbey Gate. Okay, so that's a fair conclusion. And the third one they came up with, that this wasn't a complex attack. And the reason being was because there were some reports that this was a coordinated complex attack and not a lone bomber. Because evidently the UK force had fired a couple of rounds for crowd control. The Marines thought they were being shot at. They returned fire. But it turns out that wasn't the case. It was just a suicide bomb. It wasn't a complex attack. So the investigation determined that. The investigation also determined that the attack was not preventable without degrading to maximize the number of evacuees. So basically what the investigation is saying was our priority was to maximize the number of evacuees without concern for force protection. And if we had concern for force protection and protecting our troops, reduce the number of evacuees, extend the timeline for the operation, these are the type of decisions the commander makes. But when you got too many commanders and everybody's sort of in hell defilade because this massive humanity is coming at them, nobody's really thinking, right? And their guidance is get as many people out as quickly as possible so we can shut this operation down by 31 August. I think that was a fatal error. The investigation also made a few recommendations. First one was that the troops should get a TBI screening done, traumatic brain injury screening done. The second recommendation was that the troops should get a mental health evaluation. The third recommendation was that there should be interagency neo doctrine. We already sort of have that with the State Department, the Marine Corps does, and every embassy has a neo plan, and these plans are exercised, but nonetheless, that's a recommendation. And then their fourth recommendation was that there has to be a further investigation done on a platoon commander who claimed that a civilian was killed by a flashbang. Okay, and that was it. That was their four recommendations. And here's the fundamental problem I have with all this. We talked about some of the issues with the investigation's conclusions. Now let me talk about the recommendation. The investigation never recommended that there ought to be a broader investigation done on the plan and the command and control and the events leading up to Abbey Gate. Nothing was said about that. They didn't even recommend that. And the reason for that is because we selectively cherry pick these officers from within the command to do the investigation. Now you got a 1-star doing this investigation. He's certainly not going to say anything derogatory about the 4-star because he wants to get promoted. And this, Lance Curtis is evidently a good officer, and he did get promoted to a 2-star, right? But I'll tell you what, if he called for a broader investigation, I doubt he would have. So, this is a shell game, and this shell game is what gets us in trouble. I'll tell you why this is a shell game, because the command, CENTCOM, claims that they did an investigation, and the investigation cleared everybody. What they don't tell you is that the investigation was very, very narrow in scope and was conducted just for Abbey Gate. That's it. But because the investigation is classified and the public doesn't have access to it, we don't know. So we just fall for this shell game and we assume that the investigations happened. The investigation never happened. There's no broad investigation conducted on how this whole operation was planned, why these officers were retired early, the actual chain of command, why it was so convoluted at Kabul airport, the force protection measures, why were Marines allowed to intermingle with the crowd, knowing there's a suicide bomb threat out there. And finally, CENTCOM doesn't tell us that this investigation was conducted by their own people that reported directly to the 4-star. And so it's kind of misleading on their part to say, hey, there's an investigation conducted, there's no wrongdoing, and the matter's closed. Well, it isn't closed because Secretary Hegseth is opening the matter, rightly so. I remind you to please hit a like, share, and subscribe. And I certainly value your time in watching these videos and commenting at the end of the segment. I look forward to your comments. So let's dig into what Colonel CJ Douglas talks about in part 3 of the Kabul withdrawal.
Where I started to mention, we interviewed everyone, we interviewed as many people as we could, right? Now, I mentioned the size of the team. And we did over 170 interviews in the course of as many days as we did. Interviewed all of the snipers except one. And that was, that was Sergeant Sanders, who you played a clip from on your show. And so I'd say, the question, I would ask is, why didn't anybody interview him? And the answer is really quite simple. It's not nefarious. He was in critical condition. He was unable to be in.
Sure.
And so, given the scope, the time, the scope, like, hey, this is the focus of your investigation. Even if I want to interview. Okay.
Let me just interrupt. Who gave you that focus of investigation?
That came from the CENTCOM commander. This is kind of like cheating at chess, right?
Yeah. So that's why I asked you who the people belong to. So the lead investigator is from RCENT, the Brigadier General. Okay. His deputy, you are from MARCENT.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So all out of CENTCOM. We all work ultimately. And again, at what level is the investigation? Well, you know what level it isn't?
Yeah.
CENTCOM. Yeah. It's down here.
Yeah.
And I'll tie that up with a nice bow at the end. So Mark Sanders, he's in critical condition. My boss, even up until, we were, like short final going in to brief the investigation, and he called the doctor to see if we could get in and interview before. And it was, not possible. So that's it. Investigation complete. Again, we interviewed every other sniper. So based on that information, I still felt confident and feel confident that we had all the available information from all of the totality of all the Marines that we interviewed. You know, briefed. General McKenzie actually had said, "Hey, you know what? Pack your bags. You guys are going and briefing this at the Pentagon." So, all the different briefs that we had to do at the Pentagon,
Sure.
and then of course up on the Hill. Now, as you said, hey, who ultimately it's right. It's the CENTCOM commander. I mean, it's like we all work for him. This investigation scope is at this level. Like it doesn't it's not involving the decision-making process before, during, and after the blast for CENTCOM. It's not involving the decision-making process for MARCENT or ARCENT.
Right.
It's not involving any of that. And that's critical, because then what happens is, and this is where I think it's kind of disingenuous, is, people look and say, hey, well, the investigation was fucked up because they never said, the president or, McKenzie or, well, the investigation cleared everything, said nobody did anything wrong. It's like, hey, time out. You know what? What the investigation, determined was these events. And I would suffice it to say that given the hand they were dealt at the battalion commander and below, they did the best they could with the situation that they were given. They never should have been put in that situation. So when you say the evacuation was a success, I'm going to disagree. Like, yes, you got, 128,000 people. I'm going to say we put those Marines, sailors, airmen, and soldiers in a terrible position, not just at the time, but for years to come, as they deal with the everlasting effects of, in some cases, having to make a life or death decision for somebody to say, I can't let you through. And so they and their families have got to deal with that.
Yeah. That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But that said, and so now the next thing is the investigation, when complete, then here's where things kind of went awry, is when it was briefed to the service chiefs, the commandant, General Berger, and was briefed, and I think it was General McConville who was for the Army, and he had said, "Hey, I recommend, I'm going to offer the, I recommend you use the investigative team to brief the families." And General Berger was like, we're Marines. We do this all the time. We don't need them. We already have a team assembled that's going to do the briefs. General McConville said, we saw from the Niger incident.
Yeah.
If you have people that aren't involved in the investigation as part of the family briefs, that it can cause a problem. They're going to have questions that your people.
And they deserve the truth. Yeah.
Right. Berger was very dismissive. And so, we got this. Now, that said, the Army with Staff Sergeant Ryan Knaus had members of the investigative team participate in the brief. The Navy with Maxton Soviak had members of the team involved in the brief. Marine Corps had none. We briefed, a sea of colonels, and so there are a couple that I'm friends with that were like, "Hey, listen, okay, I got a question," and even to I'm going in and talking to the family, or, "Hey, I got a question from the family." And so it was very scripted. It should have been like, okay, hey, you're going to show this video, and they put together and showed the ISR footage, and and here's this, here's the the key takeaways. In some cases, the autopsy reports, and it's like, again, very scripted. So every family in theory should have gotten the same brief,
the same,
even though not getting it from the same briefer. So in execution, that's not what happened. One.
Right.
Now, in any crisis, people band together. So of course, they shared information And like, my briefer told me this. Well, mine told me this. Well, that's a lie.
Yeah.
That's one problem. Okay, so they were briefed in a vacuum as opposed to being briefed together. Next problem is, we had talked about briefing the Marines from 2-1 in total on the brief before it hit the news. Because again, it came from them. Like it was a result of them and all a totality of all the other interviews to give them a chance to process before seeing it on the news.
Right.
Didn't happen. And it wasn't a because of Lance Curtis it didn't happen. It wasn't because of CJ Douglas or any others it didn't happen. So that was challenging because now, and as well as I do, everybody has an experience in combat and experiences vary. And so
yeah, of course, yeah.
Through a critical event, it's like that view of through an RCO or more often like a soda straw. And so, I might see this much of an event and I think that I've got the entire event. And in reality, we'll open the aperture and that's not actually what I see. And so in some cases where, hey, I heard this now becomes I saw this or I experienced this. And then the problem is that then that goes to, now, somebody ends up briefing, briefing. Somebody ends up talking to a family member out of concern, like empathy,
right,
and sharing something that they think is
yeah,
actually fact when in fact it's
but it's
not.
not. Yeah,
But the family is going to cling to anything. Because why? Because they've just been through the most horrific circumstance. Like, with as many people as we lost in Afghanistan and Iraq, this is worse because this is literally, you're the last certain,
yeah, of course, yeah,
yeah, your Marine, soldier, sailor, airman is the last one to have been killed. Well, in this case, it's just Marine, soldier, sailor to have been killed in Afghanistan. And so it's like, so then you come back to when somebody said, nothing here is worth dying for. Well, was it, well, apparently something was because my son was there. My
yeah,
daughter was there.
yeah.
So
So when you guys briefed the service chiefs, were they all together or did you do it
they were all
separately?
together. And so,
Oh.
so were so was the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Army, all the
Did you guys
secretaries,
ever
all the service chiefs.
brief the Secretary of Defense?
We did brief him. Yeah, we briefed him. So the day we briefed him was the same day. I think it was John McCain's funeral. So we got through his brief, and then we briefed his undersecretary on a different day.
Right.
Yeah.
And how I mean, I don't want you to go into any private stuff.
Nothing remarkable came out of it. One thing I will remember is um, Mr. Kirby, formerly Admiral Kirby, came in late. I know there was a lot going on that day because, as I mentioned, I think it was John, it was in the process of John McCain's funeral, Senator McCain's funeral. And so, whether it was that or some other event, he came in late. And so, I know anecdotally at a later point, he had spoken on the news about from my perch, I didn't see any, and it's like, well, you must have missed the whole thing. And at the last stop, you definitely missed it because you came in late in the brief during when we just,
Yeah.
discussed chaos at the gate. And I'm not taking a shot at him, but I'm saying, he kind of missed it because he came in late. So the most remarkable thing out of that, at a brief in the SECDEF was, it ran out of time, so he didn't get the full brief.
The
And
SecDef didn't. He didn't sit through the full brief.
we ran out of time, and I think it had to do something with Senator McCain's funeral. And we didn't go back to brief him.
So the 13 Marines, soldier and sailor, they ran out of time. Basically. I mean, you gotta be shitting me. Did he assign
I'm
the
not
IG?
sure.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's just.
I mean, I imagine he got a read ahead. I mean, everybody got a binder, and I mean, altruistically, I'm sure he
I
read
get
it.
all that, but what kind of message did that send that these lives are not important, that you run out of time to, for whatever reason, right? To me, that would be the most important thing because you owe it to the mothers and fathers of America that are paying your damn salary. I mean, it's really that simple. The next question would be the IG, the DOD IG, was he sitting through the brief, Inspector General?
Yes, if I recall, and I'm trying to remember who it was. He was.
Okay, now, did the DOD IG at the DOD at the SECDEF level, did they want to do their own investigation, or were they happy with the conclusions that you all came up with?
So, one thing and there were a number of others, because you have to remember at the time you had the righteous strike that wasn't. So you had another investigation going on involving that. Then there was the FBI had the suicide bomber investigation. So we turned our information over for that because that wasn't the scope of ours. But because I remember running into a Marine one-star that you and I both know in Fort Bragg and
Right.
being like, "Hey, sir, what are you doing here?" It's like, "Oh, military matters." "What are you doing here, CJ?" We're here on military matters too." Like, completely unrelated. So as far as if they had done something, I would say there were a number of other investigations going on. However, with some of the other ones, we had to provide our information. As I mentioned, like with the FBI, we had to brief them. There was another investigative team that was looking at another aspect, but still not at the level that I would have thought. And as I had even said to them, I'm like, well, based on this, you should be interviewing these Afghan general officers because frankly, their input matters as well. Well, we're not going to interview any Afghans. Okay, well, then you're not going to have a full investigation.
Yeah.
So as far as what actions they did or didn't do, I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't have any oversight on that, nor did I
What
hear
about
anything.
the drone strike was investigated? The Ronnie's drone strike that you mentioned, where 10 Afghans were killed, 7 of them were children.
I had heard that there was an investigation into that. I never saw or heard the results of it.
Now, was that a CENTCOM level investigation or DOD?
I don't
No.
know, but
Yeah.
I would bet, once again, it was. I mean, I'm speculating. I would
Right.
speculate it was probably done at the CENTCOM level.
Yeah. Well, that's like investigating yourself, right?
Well, it would be because ultimately, who was in charge of Afghanistan at that time?
I wish I had that privilege.
You know,
Anyway,
not only are, not only are
yeah,
you an intelligent man, you're a good-looking man as well.
yeah. There you go.
Investigation complete.
Yeah. Okay, so let's moving forward to let's try to wrap this up. I mean, so what were some of now obviously, I mean, it's such a unique situation because everything just vaporizes right around the withdrawal, right? I mean, nothing goes to plan as we all know. But what were some of the lessons learned in terms of command and control, in terms of planning, and in terms of ROE? I mean, those are the main things that I'm seeing, some of the issues here. And what could have we done different? If you can
You
just
know,
kind of wrap that up.
so I would say, one of the things was there were a number of different after actions which we, weren't privy to. Um, one of the things that I will say, and this is, in my CJ Douglas retired colonel perspective, I would say a key fact that was an inhibiting factor, one is, in an after action would be that the MARCENT commander was not present for the evacuation. And by present, I mean at the minimum, being in Tampa.
Hmm.
Frankly, he should have been forward, like we talked about, like somewhere where he could influence something that isn't sitting on a promotion board in Virginia. I know we're supposed to say military matters, but that's his focus was not on the evacuation, the largest evacuation in history. Force structure. I mean, quite frankly, that really needs to be looked at when we talk about being, hey, NEOs being what we do. Growing up, as during
Yeah.
the time frame, that's what the Marine Corps does, right? We do NEOs, and the reason we do NEOs is because it shows, we're an expeditionary force in readiness. We go in, we execute, and we leave, and everyone around the world knows that until we're not ready to do that. And we've seen that, there, since Afghanistan, there have been a couple NEOs that the Marine Corps wasn't
Yeah.
postured to do.
Sudan.
Right.
Right.
So what we really need to look at is, you know, is the planning, coordination, and execution, is the force posture, is like, are we manning, training, and equipping the right force? Have we involved the combatant commanders in that? Because I mean, it's one thing for the commandant to be, of the mindset of like, hey, here's what the Marine Corps is going to look like. Hey, that's mildly interesting because
Yeah.
what's it going to look like in CENTCOM? What force are you going to provide CENTCOM? What force you're going to provide to Indo-PACOM? And are you going to be able to execute? Do you
Right.
have a necessary force to execute? And so with that, I'd say, after action wise, like, hey, there's some key questions that have got to be asked on not just the joint staff, but specifically some hard questions to the Marine Corps about readiness, about manning, training, and equipping, about employment. And, and who is picking up that phone that, when the wolves are at the door and somebody calls 911, who's picking up that phone? And are they ready to execute, or are they, hey, yeah, that's not our job because we do Indo-PACOM, or hey,
Yeah.
we're postured for Indo-PACOM, or so after action wise, like those are some hard questions that have got to be answered. And I'm going to say I don't have the answers for them,
Right.
but I'm speculating from my viewpoint. Like those are things that I saw. I didn't see the Marine Corps. I saw the Marines of 2-1, the Special Purpose MAGTF, the Marines of the MEU. They were, hey, they made the best out of a bad situation. They showed
Oh, sure.
adaptability, flexibility, right? They answered the call that they were required to call. Some sadly paid the ultimate sacrifice. But as far as what the way forward looks like, I mean, you've been through a MEU, you've gone, SOTG now,
Right.
Expeditionary Operations Training Group, provides the package where, you get certified and you can conduct a NEO. Nobody saw anything to that size or scope. And relationships matter, because one of the things that, as an anecdote, or as an aside, not an anecdote, the Marines of 2-1 actually had, Gulf Company specifically, had done some work with, and I forget what country, but with the Marines, the soldiers of UK, the two para. They ultimately ended up working together side by side in the Abbey Corps. So they
Oh,
already had an existing relationship. So as far as information sharing
sure.
and
Trust.
working together,
Yeah.
trust is exactly it. There
Yeah.
was trust there because they already worked together. And, and the company commanders both had good relationships with that. Yeah, I mean, there's a classified after action I know that was done at Marcent. I know that there were ones done at 2-1, again, that that we didn't get to see, was after our time frame. But I think that ultimately should get released so that we can
Yeah.
we can take a look. Hey, what was really learned from this? How are we going to do things better? And not just not just what and how, but like, are we implementing it? Because in this, you could say, well, we don't always have to train to a NEO. Like, no, we have to be able to do crisis response. Like, how is it being implemented into training? So that, a unit that's going to be postured to maybe do that mission has,
Yeah,
trained on
but
the right.
I don't know. I think the skill set for the young Marine, the rifleman, isn't
Right.
really different, right? I
No,
mean, at
no,
the
the
end of the
skill
day.
set for the rifleman is, yeah, you're right.
But I think at the
Command
higher
element of it.
staffs, yeah, that's the difference, right? That comes in. Uh, so I'm not quite sure if those lessons, if we really learn those lessons at the tactical level, and it's very unfortunate because it's going to happen again, right? I mean, history repeats
Right.
itself. We know this very much so. But the question I would have for you is one of that a lot of people are asking and wondering on this Pete Hegseth's the Secretary of Defense's investigation that he's conducting on withdrawal. How do you see that unfolding based on your experience and your past?
So, I, first off, I'd love to be a part of it. The second is I'd like to see how they, as far as how they look at it, because like really, it's almost a number of separate um, investigations, because that's a daunting, for one element. And so I would almost submit it would almost be like a command element, like think about it like a MU, right?
Yeah.
Hey, a command element with a BLT, an LCE, and a
Yeah.
case.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, it would be like, because you got to look at the State Department. Like, it has to be done. You also have to look at, like, because we've heard about, hey, I was the last person in the room for the president's decision. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Um, and then you got to look at, on the DoD side. So, the executive branch, um, the DoD, and the state. You've got to look at all three of those elements. And so, with and each one, you've got to have the associated people. It's got to be it's like I would submit, yeah, it's got to be in a classified setting, but you've got to have the ability so that you don't have, like, we had people that were typing, like literally
Yeah.
typing
Yeah.
or taking notes. Hey, have it transcribed so that, with an element that, you can do
Stenograph or
a
whatever.
video
Yeah.
interview, and then you can compile all that, conduct your analysis and synthesis, generate your next target of people you need to investigate, speak to, not investigate, but speak to, which is, kind of how we did it. We started at the top, we
Right.
worked our way down, and then, in size and scope, we put like people together, operations and intelligence paired together. Why? Hey, intel drives ops. But at the same time, it was the idea that, like, sometimes, to prevent that incestuous amplification, it was like, hey, this is what I saw. Well, this is actually what was happening. Really? I didn't know that. Or, hey, we were in, 100% in line the whole time.
Right.
Or, hey, well, remember when this happened? And that's what we saw. And we did that at each echelon. And then again, as far as like with the group interviews, like, we need to see you, and you after. Who else to the group do we need to interview? Who is it that we're missing? And in some cases, it
But
was
I'm going to
surprising.
put you on the spot here. But I mean, what do you think? Do you think that anybody's culpable or responsible for the debacle, which many believe is the greatest military debacle in modern history? Right? Do
I
you?
mean, it's up
I
me
mean,
on the
I'm
spot.
from.
I'm going to say, yeah, at the tactical level. When I say tactical level,
Yeah.
I'm going to frame that as the battalion commander and below. No, the operational level. I'm going to say, frankly, more investigation is required, as far as the commandant and some of the members of his staff. The
Wow.
Marcent commander, 100%. Um, Hey, General McKenzie, there's still some questions that got to be answered. But then, we're talking strategic there.
Right.
So there's some questions that have got to be answered as far as the big three there, between General McKenzie,
Mm-hmm.
General Milley, and the SECDEF. And
Yeah.
because, and I say, I'm not like, because they're outside my scope, but I
Right.
would, I would love to be part of that to be able to ask questions, because at the end of the day, maybe there's something that's like, no, this is actually, what I said was that what I said in my book was this, which I doubt. But then at the political level, 100% hands down. I mean, the president, and I don't even need to investigate that. I mean, I would love to,
Yeah. But
but
unfortunately,
the
he's got
point is,
immunity, right? He's got immunity.
he's got immunity.
The
But
president. Yes.
and it's very easy to say the buck stops with me, but it's all that guy's fault.
Yeah.
Is wrong, because as we've seen with each administration, with a stroke of an executive order, you can stop anything. And again, it's like in March, General Rich Clark, SOCOM commander, testified before Congress, and this is March of 21,
Right.
that the Taliban were not meeting the conditions of their conditions-based
Yeah.
withdrawal. And it wasn't until April that the president said, hey, you know what? We're pulling out. Like,
Yeah.
I thought they weren't meeting the conditions. Why are we pulling out? It was stable with 2,500 U.S. personnel, and then there was the associated coalition partners. Like you, I don't agree, I don't think that it needed to go on forever, because I think in one of our side conversations in one of my tours in Afghanistan, you had mentioned with the amount that we've put into it, we could have sent all the Afghan males to school to become doctors,
Yeah.
uh, doctors and teachers, and I think we'd have an entirely different Afghanistan. And so to that, so to for the president, if we didn't conduct a withdrawal, because I'll say with that, he had made a campaign speech, and I think he was speaking about Iraq when he said, if we leave today, if I became president and said we're leaving today, it would take 1 year to depart properly. If I said, hey, we're going to rush it, we could do it in, I think he said 7 months. And he said, but we'd end up leaving a lot of equipment there, equipment that someday my grandkids would have to be going back to fight. Now that said, what changed from that campaign speech to April 15th of 21? I'd like to know. And that's why I think that, and so then, as I say, who was the last person in the room? But who are all the people in between? Like, who are, National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan? Hey, what information did you get? It's easy to say right now, like, hey, well, I wasn't entirely in agreement. Okay, well, what were you doing differently? And so who in that circle, but even more importantly, and this is the nefarious piece that really just keeps me up at night, is every single one of them. Like, there was one news station that was reporting that the president was cognitively impaired. Now, in the previous administration, under the Trump administration, everyone but Fox was saying, "Look, he's cognitively impaired. Did you see the way he waved? Clearly, he's cognitively impaired." So baseless. But then with this, it was like, no, he's running circles around everybody. Okay, was he really running circles around everybody? And now, as we're just learning, everything's auto-penned. So I would really like to see, like, I understand the president has immunity. And I understand everybody has gotten some sort of signed, pardon for whatever it is that they didn't do. But it's, no, like, hey, we've led in combat. There's responsibility and there's accountability. Like, I can delegate responsibility. I can't delegate accountability. Like, if I delegate you responsibility, like, okay, well, it gets screwed up. Like, ultimately, I'm the one that delegated the responsibility. I'm the guy. So, but as far as all those that are charged with providing proper input, but not just providing proper input, but being stewards, because they all took oaths as well. And so if they were hiding the fact that the president was impaired when he made these decisions, that I believe we as Americans, us as service members, we deserve to know that. And so that in the way forward, how does this happen again? Well, there's got to be a system, a mechanism where it's like, hey, cognitive testing for presidents, is that a bad idea? No, I don't think so. We've seen one who's volunteered for it and done it.
Yeah. I think my issue with all this is, there's a lot of people skating, right?
Yeah.
And we know the 14 leadership traits. JJ did tie buckle, right? Yeah. But there's a very important trait that's missing out of that you and I were never, taught. Well, we talked about it a lot. That 14 leadership traits ought to be JJ did tie a buckle. A is missing out of that. Accountability, right? It's missing.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about these 14 leadership traits, justice, judgment, decisiveness, integrity and tact and, endurance, enthusiasm, all that stuff, we kind of skip over accountability. But let's put that aside for a minute. The problem I have is we are, as service members, as officers, we're men of honor, right? And if you hearken back to history, President Eisenhower, before 6 June 1944, penned a letter saying that if this operation failed, the D-Day landings, he's taking responsibility. Admiral Nimitz did the same thing in the Pacific Theater when he committed all his carriers. He penned a similar letter accepting responsibility because that's what George Marshall expected out of them. people holding themselves accountable. So that's the first part. The second part is that there were two general officers that landed on the Normandy landing on D-Day, right? One was Brigadier General Roosevelt, right, with the assault waves. I'm talking assault waves, right? And the second was General Coda. And when he landed, he saw these, soldiers pinned down, Rangers, heavy fire, and he got up and he said, "Rangers lead the way, charge." That's where the saying came from. Rangers lead the way.
No kidding.
Right? Yeah, and then they went inland, right?
And we've forgotten these parts about history, what men of honor do. So
I don't personally give a shit what the investigation says. I really don't,
Right.
And I think those are just optics and very important for the families to find the truth. But men of honor know what the truth is. Men of honor know what responsibility is. Men of honor know what accountability is. And in my view, I think bad things happen. It's combat. There's many things you and I don't control. But men of honor hold themselves accountable.
Yeah.
And rather than coming out and saying, that drone strike was a mistake, I'm responsible, I accept responsibility. Well, if you accept responsibility, do something about it.
Right.
Be a man of honor, a Marine of honor, a soldier of honor, and say, I retire at a minimum.
Right.
At a minimum. But these people skate, and they're going to point their finger to a geriatric president or not. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, right? People say maybe he's doing TRT. I don't know. I have no idea what Biden's doing, right? And nor do I care, frankly.
Right.
He's at a different echelon. But if I don't like something, Austin Miller was a man of honor. He said, I don't want to be part of this. David, if you go back, and I don't know if you remember General Newbold.
Yeah.
Director of Operations, Joint Staff. He was a man of honor. He said, you know what? Iraq invasion is wrong. I'd rather, and he was slated to be the Commandant of the Marine Corps.
Right.
Right. And he said, I'm done. I'd rather go home, and the invasion went on and we saw the consequences. Right. And General Szczynski said the same thing. Right. So you got to be able to speak truth to power. And that's the whole lesson in this. Otherwise, if we don't learn these important lessons, this is going to happen again and again and again, as it did from Vietnam, Saigon, to Kabul. And getting into wars is very easy. It's like a barroom fight. But getting out of a war is difficult. Maybe 7 months, maybe a year, maybe 5. And I don't think we're out of it yet. I don't think we got into Iraq in 1990, but we never got out of it.
Right.
We're still fighting that damn thing, right? They just did a strike today, some target in Iraq. So it's very, very important that that the military is my other problem is, and maybe we can do a subsequent podcast on this, is the military is losing credibility with the American people.
Yeah. And you have to say, and why is that? And I would submit, with as many retired, there are some general officers that are silent in retirement. There are some that are, but then pick a viewpoint, and it's like, in some cases, like, hey, you don't speak for all veterans. And frankly, your viewpoint is making all of us look bad.
Yeah.
Like, because of your power and position when you retired, it's different than, hey, I got out as Lance Corporal and I'm a veteran and I'm speaking my mind. Hey, you know what? Same thing,
Yeah. Good on you.
Tired, speaking my mind. Like, this is, I'm clarifying with, this is my perspective alone.
Yes.
I'm not speaking on behalf of all veterans. I'm not speaking on behalf of the military, the Marine Corps.
And we have to exercise our rights,
Right.
We get our rights from this document right here, right? The Constitution. That's what gives us the rights. And if you don't exercise them, they atrophy. Right. And I kick myself in the ass. I'll tell you what. If you ask me what some of my regrets are, the number one regret is I didn't speak out soon enough. I waited 20 years and I kept quiet, and it didn't really eat at me because I've enjoyed my life, but I kept quiet. I kept silent, and I questioned myself: what if I hadn't kept silent? Would these people have been in power? Because I remember leaving the Marine Corps and telling my commanding general that if you keep promoting this guy, one day he's going to make a big mess. And unfortunately, I wasn't wrong. And that big mess ended up being the Kabul withdrawal. Now,
Right.
I'm not pinning all the blame on him. All I'm saying is you need men of honor. You don't need a bunch of snakes that are self-serving or
Right.
or conducting their own investigations, because I've seen his investigations, how he's done them, right? So I've got
Yeah.
firsthand experience. So I think that's the greatest lesson. And I mean, we can sit here and say, okay, who's responsible? What happened? Biden did this.
Right.
Should we have done that? Should we have done that? But this is a bigger issue about how do we change the culture of our military? How do we
Mhm.
go back to the men of honor that George Marshall created, the grandfather of the modern military?
Right.
How do we do that? And until we change the culture, I hate to tell you this, those young lance corporals that are standing out there are going to suffer the same outcome. And that's what
Right.
really gets to me. I mean, and it eats at you because you've been a successful combat troop leader on many occasions. And, the relationships and, it's the fatherhood that you develop with these young Marines. It's
Right.
unbelievable, in my opinion, right? So I think
And
that's the big lesson is we still haven't learned the lesson of what honor means coming out of Kabul.
like you, so if I recall, your son served as well.
Yeah, he's a Marine.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's a good
and
kid.
and actually he linked us back up after I think it was when the email address that I lost and had lost contact. He actually connected me back with you for my last Afghan deployment.
Yeah.
And
He's
so as I mentioned him, so as a not just not just having served, but having then inspired service in your son. My son currently is an Army first lieutenant.
Oh, is he really?
He is, yeah,
Where's he
and
stationed at?
he's an infantry officer.
Oh,
He's
good. Like his
he's
dad.
down at Fort Stewart, but he's not. He's deployed right now. But but to the point is that like the process, the accountability,
Yeah.
the shared sacrifice, the leadership is
Yeah.
more important now to me. Like, like I signed up, I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
I was fully prepared, like, hey, I've lived a good life. I've got a great spouse, wife, Susan, the same
Yeah.
one that I've had for the entire time that I was in the Marine
Yeah.
Corps and even now. And I
Bless
wouldn't
him.
be where I
Yeah.
am today without her, nor would my son. But it's like, and so I go back to, in any one of my combat tours, like, I've had a good life. If I don't make it through this, I've had a good life.
Yeah,
And
you done great, man.
my
Shit.
wife and son will be fine. So with that, it's different now as a parent where you're like, no, you all need to lead better, do better, be better,
Yes.
because like when we say our nation's most precious asset is the US service member, it is.
Yeah.
But it's even more near and dear to my heart now. Like, I mean, I'd have died for any one of my Marines. I absolutely
Yeah.
love them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And 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 I think about the ones that I lost every day. Um and think, so I can't imagine what they went through. And as such, I think about the families of all the service members that have been lost, but those that were lost at Abbey Gate. And as a parent, and I had always said, it's, my wife said it actually better than I. It's like, it's different when it's your spouse that, she's like, my husband going to combat's one thing.
It's
My
yeah. Oh yeah.
son
Yeah.
deploying is completely different.
Different. It's a different emotion.
Yeah. And I always, believe that when she had said it and then, felt it more now being, a parent.
Yeah.
So that said, when we say, like, yeah, I mean, it's like in order to ensure, it's like, yeah, we keep reliving the past in many cases.
Yeah.
And that's unacceptable.
I had
The
another
lesson captured is a
cock.
lesson captured, not a lesson learned, unless we put it into some sort of training.
I had another cockamamie idea back in 2001. Uh, when we first started this whole venture, I believe the ransom or the award for bin Laden was 5 million, right? So I remember sitting in a discussion in the bubble, and I'm looking at 5 million. I'm like, he can trump that. So I'm like, why only 5 million? Let's raise it, you know. So they came back. I think they raised it to 15 million. And I looked at that. I said, you got to be shitting me. I said, if we're serious about this, let's put $1 billion on his head, because somebody will invest 100 million to find him for $1 billion. Think about it, right? There's people out there that'll do it. And they thought I was nuts. They really thought this mad Marine lieutenant colonel is insane. He's just coming up this. But think about that, right?
How much do we invest in Afghanistan?
Yeah, we've lost trillions, and then in Iraq, right? But it's not that; it's the lives that we lost, and also the civilian lives that got caught in the middle of this, right? And now, for me, you know, I mentioned I kept quiet for 20 years, but now that I saw this Kabul withdrawal, I didn't even have a social media account. I had nothing, right? I had an email account. That was it. And after the Kabul withdrawal, I got fired up, you know, and then we could offline talk about Lieutenant Colonel Schiller or how he was mistreated, you know, fine. I mean, you know, we can debate the issue. Should he have spoken out in uniform or he shouldn't have? But he was reaching out. And if we believe in PTSD and mental health issues and whatever and what have you, and TBI, you know, somebody should have put his armor on him. Berger should have, and said, you know what, let's talk about this. You're absolutely right, right? But they didn't. They threw him in jail to silence him, right? And so that kind of gnawed at me also. And then I said, you know what, I'm going to start speaking up. And they even sent the FBI to my house. I don't know if you know that.
So I learned that actually through Tim Lynch.
Yeah.
No, Tim was he was one of my IFC instructors. I love him.
Yeah, he's awesome.
And Jeff Kenny. So Tim Lynch, Jeff Kenny.
Yeah, of course.
But so I found that out from him, and I was horrified. I mean, you know, I was like,
you know, I don't even have a speeding ticket. So, you know, 2 FBI agents come to my house, and you know, and they said, you know, you haven't done anything wrong or illegal, but we're worried about some of the comments, your social media comment. You know, I was like, if I haven't done anything wrong or illegal, have a good day, you know. End of story. Go away. But again, and the point being is, it goes back to this. I'm exercising my First Amendment rights. You don't have to agree with me. We don't have to agree. You know, freedom of speech is built upon disagreement, right? Civil disagreement. That's the purpose of freedom of speech. And I think Americans need to talk. They need to participate in democracy. And democracy requires participation. And it just doesn't mean that you vote every 2 years. It requires all of us to get off our rears and participate however we can. And the way I've chosen not to participate is speak out on some of these issues and, you know, get to the truth and learn lessons for the future so we don't repeat. And because when I look in the eyes of my twin grandsons, I don't want them going to war. They're precious, you know, and you think it's different as having your child go off to war, you know, that Susan's saying it's a different feeling. It's a hell of a lot different with your grandchildren, you know, exponentially different, right? And so with my son, I feel we failed, right? Because he had to go off to war, right? But I don't want to repeat that mistake for my grandchildren or my granddaughter, right? If she chooses to go in the military. I've got three grandsons. But so I think that's important. I think you got to be passionate about it. And I think it's got to be meaningful, that we believe in something greater than ourselves. And at our age now, I mean, you know, I'm not a old fart, but I am. But, you know, that we have to, you know, give whatever time we have left to make sure that these lessons are not wasteful, you know. And a lot of times we just kind of put them aside and, you know, write a book or whatever. And it just gnaws at me that we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And we need men of honor. We need men of honor. Not this cuddly, fuddly, gummy bear type individuals, you know. I just don't care for it, frankly. But I appreciate your time, sir. I mean, this has been a fantastic. I'm really glad you're the first person I'm doing this conversation piece with on my channel. And you know, I the viewers are going to learn a lot, and I will definitely have you come back on and talk about some other topics, because I think we think along the same lines, and I think America needs to see men of honor like yourself that have served your country and the New York State as a state trooper. And I was just thinking back about it, you know. I mean, having been raised in Connecticut, I used to drive through New York quite a bit, you know. You guys got those funny looking hats as the state troopers, right?
Yeah. Yep. The Stetson,
Yes,
the cowboy hat.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I remember that
Yeah, I'm
stuff. You know,
5'9" with the Stetson. I was 6'7".
6'7". Yeah, but you know, it's pretty funny because up in New England area, you don't see a cowboy hat, right? You don't
No.
see that
No.
stuff. It's like, how the hell did that come up here, you know? But it's
Yep.
pretty interesting. But I appreciate your time. I mean, we've been at it for 6 hours, pretty much more.
Wow.
6 hours, yeah. And
It's been a it was an honor being your first your first interview, and I'll say it.
there'll be many
I'll
more.
consider it a
There'll be many more.
privilege, but
Yeah.
it's always a pleasure because, like I said, you were very impactful
No,
in
thank you.
my development as a Marine officer, in my development as a combat leader. Quite frankly, you know, and the fact that you were always willing to teach, coach, mentor, advise, you know, sounding board. I know there were a couple times I vented from Afghanistan specifically.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so I don't, you know, it's not just me that you had an impact on, but it's all the Marines that I led as well. And so to that, I say, I
No,
thank
thank
you.
you. Yeah. No, you know,
Uh,
that's what Semper Fidelis means, band of brothers. Yeah, we're brothers.
yeah,
And we have to stand up for each other and be there for each other. That's what Semper Fidelis. And I live this shit. I mean, I still live by the JJ did tie a buckle, you know, and I still PT every day and I still do those things that we were
yeah,
taught as young Marines. And I still love it. I mean, except for the
yeah.
beard. It's all good. CJ, thanks very much. Give my best to Susan. I wish your son, Lieutenant, uh, the best. I hope he stays safe and comes back home to the family, right? And
Thank you.
we'll be in touch. And this is a great way. We'll definitely be in touch again. And I
Thanks. I'll look
appreciate
forward
it.
to it.
Thanks,
All right.
brother. God
All right.
bless.
Cheers.
Semper Fi. Take care.
So let me just wrap up part three. So in part three, we talked about, you know, as we discussed in the introduction, some of the issues with the investigation. And I think Pete Hegseth needs to do an overall overarching investigation and look at every facet of Central Command, look at every facet of the Joint Staff and the role they played, look at every facet of Officer of the Secretary of Defense and the role that they played. And maybe, as Colonel Douglas recommended, that you know, also look at the State Department, the role they played, and other departments. So this has to be a very broad investigation, and we have to look at the key players in the decision-making cycle and to determine where they failed in their duties as commanders. Because a commander's first and foremost responsibility, in my opinion, is protection of the force. Without force protection, you can't accomplish the mission. So you got to make sure that your force is not threatened by, you know, terrorists or suicide bombers and whatnot, and you have sufficient standoff. At Kabul airport, we didn't have standoff. That begs a question that needs to be asked to CENTCOM. Why didn't you consider Bagram? You know, when everything went to shit in Kabul, did you say, hey, let's take a pause and let's move everything to Bagram? Yes or no? It's very simple. If you did suggest that, show us the evidence. Did you ever consider doing a surface evacuation to Pakistan? If you did, show us the evidence. It's really that simple. One thing that really bothers me that Colonel Douglas mentioned is when they went to brief, you know, the results of this very narrow investigation to the Secretary of Defense, he ran out of time. Imagine this: you have the greatest modern military debacle in the history of the U.S. military. You lost 13 service members. You had over 40 injured. You know, over 200 Afghans killed, and you had an erroneous drone strike, and the Secretary of the Defense runs out of time. I mean, what kind of message are you sending to the American people that our lives don't matter, that you just run out of time? I mean, what the hell could be so damn important that you were doing that day that you didn't have time to sit through the brief and ask the hard questions? You know, so I put this on Lloyd Austin's lap also. And you, Mr. Secretary of Defense, should have done an overarching investigation rather than allowing CENTCOM to do these stovepipe investigations. Because I've seen this in the military. It's very easy to do an investigation on subordinate command. You know, it's an old shell game that a lot of commanders play, and some of them are very good at it, because I endured this myself in Afghanistan. They'll investigate a subordinate command to deflect and detract attention upon themselves. And this is an old trick. And CENTCOM played this trick, and it's happened before as well. I'm very glad that Secretary Hegseth has called for this investigation. It is much needed to get down to the truth, so hard questions can be asked of everyone. And we're not going on a witch hunt. We just want to know what the hell happened. How can all these general officers fail in their leadership responsibilities? This stuff wasn't that hard. I mean, a Lance Corporal or PFC could have figured out that, going into Kabul is going to be a freaking nightmare. But they chose that. Why didn't they choose the other options? It's really that simple. So I'm really disappointed to hear that the Secretary of Defense on his face-to-face brief with the investigation team gets up and leaves in the middle of it because he ran out of time. And this really gnaws at my gut, because we lost lives, and these people that we lay our trust in that are leading us, they just run out of time because there's something more important than the lives of our sons and daughters. I think it's absolutely disgusting. Finally, I just want to thank Colonel CJ Douglas for taking the time out of his schedule, although he's retired, to come and spend many hours. These podcasts just don't happen like that. We've probably spent 6 to 8 hours talking about the issues here, and I really appreciate the time, CJ. And for the viewers, please let us know if you'd like to see a part 4. If you have questions that you want answered, leave them in the comments. I'll compile them and we'll bring them back on and have them answer some of these questions. And I'm also thinking about doing another series with Colonel CJ Douglas about comparing operations in Afghanistan with operations in Iraq. He's a very unique officer because he's been involved at a high level in both these operations, and maybe he can compare and contrast the two. So if you're interested in that series, please let me know. Before we sign off, please make sure to hit a like, a share, and a subscribe. And that's all I got. Stay rugged, stay united. Khan out.